June 2025, from Nuuk to Ottawa, headlines converge on a single reality. Greenland is moving forward with Canadian-backed extraction while Europe scrambles to lock in non-Chinese critical mineral supply. In Washington, campaign trail promises of turning the Arctic into America's resource backyard meet a colder truth: sovereignty politics, European financing, and an emerging Canada-Greenland corridor. Markets sense a shift. Miners, shippers, and policymakers read the map anew as ice routes and processing hubs rewire the North Atlantic. What happens when a small Arctic nation and its North American neighbor redraw the rare earth playbook at the very moment a US president wants the board to stay the same? For decades, the Arctic sat at the edge of North American commerce, a place where maps promised riches, but balance sheets counseled patience. The continent's mineral arteries ran south of the tree line: Prairie potash, Ontario nickel, Quebec aluminum, Labrador iron. Greenland's bedrock, dense with rare earths, molybdenum, and other strategic metals, was more geology than business plan. Washington relied on a diversified model, importing magnets and oxides as low-cost inputs for aerospace, electronics, and clean tech. Ottawa supplied energy-intensive metals with reliable hydropower and industrial know-how. Europe provided capital, standards, and a premium market. Those quiet years were defined by predictability. American firms designed and assembled, Canadian plants delivered, European buyers smooth cycles with long-run contracts. The choke points traders watched were far away: straits in warmer waters, sanctions on other continents. Prices moved inside comfortable bands that obscured a dangerous asymmetry: midstream know-how. Cracking, separation, and magnet making consolidated in one region because it seemed cheap, fast, and politically convenient. Almost no one asked what would happen if that midstream went dark. Then the ground shifted. Climate change shortened the Arctic shipping calendar and raised the value of northern sea lanes. Pandemic shocks and export controls exposed how thin Western stockpiles truly were. A new wave of industrial policy, clean tech subsidies, EV mandates, defense onshoring, turned obscure elements like neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium into boardroom priorities. Greenland's politics evolved too. Communities demanded tighter environmental standards, rejecting some projects while reopening to others that promised cleaner chemistry, local benefits, and genuine consultation. Ottawa codified a national critical mineral strategy. Washington tied defense procurement to secure non-Chinese supply. Brussels wrote its own rules. That combination, sovereignty, climate, and statecraft, transformed once sleepy rocks into strategic assets and nudged Canada and Greenland toward each other, even as the United States tried to keep the Arctic board from being redrawn without it. The United States entered this race with urgency and a familiar playbook: leverage tariffs, deploy industrial incentives, and press allies to align supply with U.S. national security needs. In the White House framing, the problem is straightforward: the clean energy transition, next-gen defense platforms, and the digital economy all rely on rare earth magnets and allied materials that, for too long, have been processed in a single region. That concentration, Washington argues, is a strategic liability embedded in everything from submarine motors to guidance systems and wind turbines. If a single midstream bottleneck can freeze a continent's ambitions, then the continent must rebuild that midstream at home, or at least under trusted flags. Tariffs function as shock therapy in this narrative. By lifting the floor under imported components, the U.S. seeks to make domestic and allied projects bankable. Defense Production Act dollars and export credit pledges are designed to crowd in private capital across the value chain. Exploration, ore sorting, cracking, solvent extraction, metal making, alloying, and magnet manufacturing. Agencies rewrite procurement guidelines to favor North American content. State governments offer siting and workforce subsidies. The Pentagon signals multi-year offtake. Meanwhile, federal rhetoric singles out the Arctic, not as a trophy, but as a corridor. Deepwater ports, ice-class vessels, and the shortest route between North America and Europe all converge north of the 60th parallel, giving the US a strategic incentive to see mines, concentrators, and processing hubs emerge along that rim. But urgency breeds friction. When Washington pushes hard on Buy American thresholds, allies hear not just resilience, but reshoring. When it pairs tariffs with security language, partners worry that commercial decisions could be relitigated every election cycle. And when US officials talk up Arctic access, Greenlanders hear a history of extraction without adequate say. The United States insists its aim is diversification, not domination. Yet, in practice, the mix of tariffs, directives, and security-tinged financing can look like a bid to center gravity within US borders. That perception matters because rare earth supply is not a single switch. It is a choreography of jurisdictions. Exploration risk sits in one place, environmental approvals in another, hydropower and chemical know-how in a third, offtake in a fourth. If any one government overweights its own piece, the dance stalls. Still, the US calculation is clear. Without tariff backstopped price signals and guaranteed demand, separation plants and magnet lines won't get built fast enough. Policymakers point to decades of underinvestment, argue that market prices never reflected geopolitical risk, and contend that a temporary period of higher costs is a fair trade for strategic autonomy. In their view, the quickest way to reduce exposure to any single foreign midstream is to stack incentives until capital moves. The gamble is that allies will tolerate the rough edges because the end state, an allied, modular, redundant supply chain, benefits everyone. The risk is that if allies feel crowded, they will hedge, and hedging in the Arctic now has a distinctly Canadian and Greenlandic flavor. Canada reads the same map differently. Ottawa's thesis is that security comes from networks, not walls. Rather than force the entire value chain into a single jurisdiction, Canada proposes to knit together complementary strengths: Greenland's ore bodies and shipping proximity, Canada's hydropower, environmental standards, and chemical expertise, Europe's offtake, financing, and industrial policy. The objective is not to bypass Washington, but to lower execution risk by spreading it across trusted partners and by anchoring midstream steps, cracking separation and alloying, where power is clean, permitting is predictable, and communities share in upside. That is why the emerging Canada-Greenland corridor matters. It is closer than many realize. Ice-class vessels hugging the Greenland coast, crossing Davis Strait, dropping into the St. Lawrence for year-round logistics. It connects ore to power without sailing halfway around the world. It places sensitive chemistry in provinces that built reputations on aluminum, titanium, and high-purity chemicals. It offers indigenous participation models forged in northern Canada and refined through impact benefit agreements. It opens doors to European buyers who want transparent chain of custody rules and to American manufacturers who need magnets that qualify under North American content tests. Crucially, it lowers the probability that any single policy swing, tariff, election, or export rule can halt progress. Ottawa also frames the issue as a social contract. Communities in the North expect better than boom and bust, reliable jobs, skills training, environmental monitoring, and infrastructure that survives the mine life. Canada argues it can deliver that predictability because it has done so in other heavy industries powered by clean electricity. When Washington emphasizes speed, Canada emphasizes staying power, long-dated capital, patient permitting, and the kind of industrial ecosystem that keeps costs down once the subsidies fade. That pitch lands in Nuuk, where leaders seek growth without repeating older extraction models, and in European capitals, where off-takers want visibility on ESG and energy inputs for decades. None of this means Canada is soft on security. On the contrary, Ottawa aligns with allies on screening, export controls, and defense applications. but it resists an approach that could pull the whole chain behind one customs frontier. In Canada's view, a corridor anchored in Greenland rock and Canadian power hedges two ways at once. Away from an over-concentrated global midstream and away from single-country politicization. If tariffs are shock therapy, corridors are recovery. Painful upfront, but stabilizing long-term. And because Ottawa is willing to co-invest with provinces, Indigenous partners, and export credit agencies, it can close financing gaps that purely private capital cannot. That mix, clean power, social license, allied offtake, and co-investment, turns a map into a market. The result is a stalemate of ambitions. Washington wants speed, control, and demonstrable de-risking inside U.S. borders. Ottawa and Nuuk want durability, shared benefits, and governance that can outlast elections. Both are responding to the same vulnerability, a fragile midstream, but they prioritize different hedges. The U.S. fears that if the center of gravity is not on shore, hard-won momentum will slip. Canada and Greenland fear that if the chain is over-centralized, a single political swing could freeze a decade of work. At the same time, the clock is ticking. EV orders don't pause for permitting. Wind projects don't wait for tariff calendars. Costs are rising. Ice-class fleets, port upgrades, tailings management, and solvent extraction lines are all battling inflation and skilled labor scarcity. Communities expect credible plans for reclamation and monitoring before shovels hit permafrost. Off-takers want magnet-grade material without greenwashing. Investors will not write blank checks. Everyone agrees the old model, cheap, concentrated, and complacent, cannot continue. No one agrees on how much price pain is acceptable to buy resilience. That is the fracture, not geology, but governance. The ore exists, the chemistry is known, the routes are charted. The question is whether North America builds a fortress or a federation, and whether it can do so fast enough to matter. Follow the corridor east from the mines to the chemistry, and you reach a Canadian midstream that must prove itself in real time. Consider a separation plant on the St. Lawrence grid, engineered to run on clean hydropower and calibrated for feedstock that would arrive from Greenland by ice-class ship. Every variable has a price. Winter berths and tug availability, reagent logistics, waste handling permits, community monitoring, skilled operators who can move from pilot to commercial throughput. The promise is compelling. Stable power, ESG-grade traceability, and proximity to North American and European off-takers. The pressure is relentless. Any delay in upstream permitting or shipping compresses, commissioning windows and inflates capex.